Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Married Devil of Edmonton, and today we get to hear from Frank Jerningham in Act 3, Scene 1. But oh my goodness, we need to talk about Act 2, Scene 3 before we get there. So the stuff that's going on, Arthur Clare doesn't want his daughter Millicent to marry the young Mounchensey because the old Mounchensey has squandered his fortune. So the plan is to put her into a nunnery, but only keep her there for a couple months while he arranges for her to marry Frank Jerningham instead. And in Act 2, Scene 2, we sort of were there. Arthur Clare told Mounchensey that he's calling off the engagement, and there was the, but what are you going to do with your daughter? Nobody's going to want her because she's going to be used goods with this broken off engagement. He's like, no, I'm going to put her into a nunnery. And the Mounchenseys leave rather in a huff, and then the Clares are like, get into the buggy, we're going off to the nunnery, we're going to check you in there today. And Peter Fable ended Act 2, Scene 2 by letting us, the audience, know that he's going to create chaos at the nunnery because he doesn't think that any of this should happen. He thinks that Millicent should be able to marry the young Mounchensey because that's who she's in love with. So Act 2, Scene 3, Peter has arranged for Millicent to get to say goodbye to the young Mounchensey. And we've got sort of the whole younger generation there, and they're saying their goodbyes, and there's a tearful, don't forget about me while I'm in the nunnery, and I'll never forget about you, that sort of thing. They say their goodbyes, and then Bilbo comes in and says, quick, you got to get into the thing and go, because you're supposed to be at the Abbey now. And everybody leaves except for the young Mounchensey and Peter. And Peter's like, hey, okay, now that that part of the plan is underway, the next thing is we're going to go and disguise you as a friar. So come on, let's go do that. So in order to thwart the plans, we're now going to have a friar in disguise on top of everything else. So Act 3, Scene 1, we are at the Abbey, and the Arthur Clare and his family are sort of checking Millicent in. They're like, here's our daughter, please make her a nun. And the prioress is like, okay, if that's going to happen, you're going to have to wake up at this time, and you're going to have to study at this time, and you're going to have to do that. And Henry and Millicent, and Frank are all like, oh my God, this sounds so terrible. Like, this is going to be awful for her, blah, 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 blah. And then Sir Arthur Clare says to the prioress, he's like, my wife has some things that she needs to discuss with you because we have some certain plans. So the prioress and the wife leave. And then the elder Jerningham his name is Ralph. Ralph turns to Frank Jerningham and he's like, so what would you think if we could make Millicent your wife? And Frank says, oh, God, sir, you amaze me at your words. Think with yourself, sir, what a thing it were to cause a recluse to remove her vow, a maimed, contrite, and repentant soul, ever mortified with fasting and with prayer, whose thoughts, even as her eyes, are fixed on heaven. To draw a virgin thus devoured with zeal back to the world, impious deed, nor by the canon law can it be done without a dispensation from the church. Besides, she is so prone unto this life as she'll even shriek to hear a husband named. So Frank, even though he knows this is a plot, he's playing up with his dad the fact that he doesn't want to marry her because he doesn't. He's in love with somebody else who lives in Essex anyway. But what he's saying here is like, oh wow, that's a big thing that you're offering me, Dad. But isn't it really, really not a good thing to take a nun out of a nunnery and make her get married? Like, if she's dedicated to God and has her eyes set on heaven, like, how do you bring her back to the mortal world and then tell her that she's going to have a husband? Like, she's not even going to want a husband after she's been a nun for this time. And Ralph is like, oh, no, silly. This whole thing is a ruse. We're just putting in here, this is a plot that me and her dad worked out. This is a plot to put her in here for about 3 months, to throw Mounchensey off the trail, and then to marry you to her instead, so that can be a thing. And he's like, oh, Frank, anyway, is like, oh, okay, well, cool, but I guess if I'm gonna have to get married, there's some things that I need to confess first. So I'm going to go and do a confession. And his father's like, oh, what a good boy you are. And that's the end of Act 3, Scene 1. So things are getting a little ridiculous here at the nunnery, and we're going to introduce a friar in disguise in the coming scenes and everything. So tune in again tomorrow as we figure out where this is going to go. I'll see you then. Mwah.